Okay, so in this section, I'll talk a little bit about the information processing model of memory and just the getting in and keeping and picking up of memory. So here's just a really simple diagram using the language of the information processing model. So information going in is encoding. So whether that's visual information or auditory information, just anything that's coming in is called encoding. If that information is kept, that would be called storage, and then retrieval would be going back and picking up that memory, going and remembering something would be the retrieval. So if you see here, this is kind of a more complicated diagram. So this is as far as storage goes, as things that are coming in and how long that they are kept for. So if you see on this side, sensory memory is that information that comes in but is not kept. So there's all kinds of information that is getting in that you don't keep as a memory. All kinds of sounds and sights and smells, that you don't remember forever. It just comes in and goes back out. It's likely not important. Sensory memory, as you can see down here, doesn't really last past 3 seconds. It just goes in and goes out. There are two types of sensory memory. Echoic are the sounds that you're hearing and that are coming in, and they're not usually kept. Iconic, this is the visual information that's coming in and is not kept. And this is just any kind of information that you're visually seeing and hearing that if somebody asked you in 5 minutes about, you wouldn't remember. If someone said, hey, what did your mom say at 8:35 on Tuesday, you're just not going to remember. You probably could not repeat what you heard a week ago at 8:35. That was it. The words went in and went out. Now, unless it was meaningful and there was something about it that you kept and went into long-term memory, then maybe you'd keep it, but it's likely echoic. The sounds went in and then went back out. Working memory is held for a little bit longer. This is the type of information that you can hold through processing. This is that, like, you're working on it, you're thinking about it, you are rehearsing it in your head, and you're holding it, and you can't really hold. So an example would be a phone number. If someone read off a phone number to you, you might have to repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over and over to yourself so that you can remember it to tell maybe your parents or maybe to tell your friend or whoever. If you need to go tell them that number, you're going to repeat it to yourself until you need to tell the person who needs it, and then you'll forget it. In a few days, it's not likely that you'll remember that. But your working memory, also called your short-term memory, that is what you're just holding on to and repeating over and over and over to yourself. Now, you can't hold more. It's 7 plus or minus 2 is the magic number of your working memory. So if you were to try to hold more than 7, really more than 9, since it's 7 plus or minus 2, you could not rehearse that many bits of information over and over. Once you get past, it's really in between 5 and 9. That's like the sweet area, the sweet spot of memory, in that if you pass 9 bits of information, you just can't hold it and rehearse it to yourself. It's just too big. And I think I missed this part, but this is called a working memory. It's kind of this new understanding of short-term memory, but working memory and short-term memory, this is this stuff that you can just hold for a little bit, that you can rehearse to yourself, and after you're done rehearsing it, then you're not likely going to remember it. But anything that we consider a memory that is held indefinitely, whether it was what you had for breakfast or recalling something farther away, your 5th birthday, that's considered a long-term memory. So anything that's kept, that's considered long-term. So it's long-lasting. And then from long-term memories, there are different types of long-term memories. So there are memories that you're conscious, that you are conscious and you're aware of, and there's memories that you're not conscious, you're necessarily picking up and recalling. So explicit memories that you're realizing that you're making, and you're realizing you're going back and you're picking it up as a memory. These would be things like, you can see my pictures kind of is covering this, but a semantic memory is a memory of facts, just factual knowledge. When did Columbus sail the ocean blue in 1492? An episodic memory, this is a memory of an event in your life. Your graduation, your 16th birthday, that's an episodic event. On the other side, implicit memories, these are things that you're not necessarily realizing you're remembering. These are things that you just do. They're usually physical motor skills. You don't realize you're picking up a memory when you're going and doing that skill. Like going to unlock your door, which way do you twist? How far do you twist? Getting into your car and putting your car into drive. You don't necessarily realize you're going back and recalling a memory, but you know how to do that. This man, Hermann Ebbinghaus, they call him the father of memory, but he actually studies something that's really interesting, especially for students, and that's we don't remember very much after we've learned it. And so the forgetting curve shows us after we've learned something, how much do we keep, or how much do we forget, I guess, if we look at it that way. And so if you even see, I know my picture's covering this, but this first section here is 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, a huge percentage, like 40% of what we learned is lost. After a month, if we're not going back and practicing that information, if you're not going back and re-studying that information or rehearsing that information, after a month, you've only really kept about 20% of the information you learned. So what this teaches us, especially for AP Psych, is if we want to remember something in May, if you just heard it once in class, you're only going to remember 20% likely of what you learned that day in class, unless you go back and do something to remember it. And so here is this next part of what he studied. So if you rehearse that information, so we're more likely, if we rehearse the information the next day, we're more likely to relearn it more quickly. And so you can see, here's his idea of retention. How long does it take me to relearn that information if I've rehearsed it? And so if you see, we've got time on this y-axis, and we've got number of rehearsals on, or repetitions on here. So the more you repeat the information or you relook at it and restudy it, the more likely, or the less time it's going to take you to relearn it the next time. So he just showed us that we start to forget items pretty quickly after we learn them, but the more time that you spend rehearsing it, the quickly it is, the easier it is, and more quick that you will pick that information back up again. Okay, so here's some just other elements of memory, and I'll just go over them kind of quickly. So shallow processing and deep processing, this is what are you doing to keep that information. Shallow processing is just repetition. If you just do repetition, you're not as likely to remember the information. Deep processing would be making meaningful connections to that information. So what are you doing to connect to it, make associations, mnemonic devices, categorizing? What are you doing to give that information meaning? The serial position effect says that we're likely to remember things at the beginning and the end and forget the stuff in the middle. The spacing effect says that you are more likely to remember information if you spread out your study periods rather than put them into one crammed session. You will retrieve that information better, you will pick it up and remember it better if you do small, short sessions over time and you space it out over time. Retrieval cues are anything that help you retrieve that memory. So maybe a retrieval cue could be a smell. You smell something and it brings back a memory. Or maybe a retrieval cue is a picture. Maybe you, in the classroom, you see a chart on the wall and that's like, oh, that makes me think of the information I need to know for my test. A retrieval cue is anything that helps bring back that memory. The testing effect says that it will be easier for you to recall information if you practice retrieval. So this would mean not just reading your study guide, but practicing remembering information. So not seeing the information, but actually going back to remember the information and retrieving the information. So this would be things like quizzing yourself on information, using flashcards where you don't actually see the answer, but you're purposely making yourself remember the answer. That says that the testing effect says that you will be more likely to remember the information if you practice testing yourself. A flashbulb memory, this is a very vivid memory that you have of an emotionally triggering event. It could be a happy event or a very sad event, but it's as you remember it as if very clearly as if you were there. Many adults have flashbulb memories of September 11th. They can remember where they were and what they were doing. Mnemonic device, this is just a memory tool where you usually use like acronyms, words, rhyming, and letters will stand for something you need to remember. All right, okay, just a few more aspects of memory. Why don't we remember things? Well, sometimes just going in, the information going in doesn't stick. And we might have something going on when we are encoding the information. So that would be encoding failure. Retrieval failure would be just something occurring when you're going back to pick up that information and you have a failure to retrieve. Interference, there's proactive and retroactive interference. Proactive, if you can see the acronym PONER, proactive interference is when old memories interfere with new memories. So something from the past is making it hard for you to remember something recent. Retroactive interference is when new memories interfere with old memories. Something recent is making it hard for you to go back and remember something that was old information. A mood congruent memory, this is a memory that comes back to you when you're in the same mood. So maybe you're angry and all of these emotions you have of when you were angry in another situation, that memory is coming back. A context dependent memory, this is a memory that is linked with a place. So maybe you, the next time you go to your grandparents' house, you have a memory of another time you were there, or you're in a place and another memory comes back of being in that same place, and that memory was linked with the context. A state dependent memory would be a memory that is linked with your psychological state. So this often is in reference to like a conscious state, whether that is being in the same like sobriety versus intoxication, and there might be a memory that comes back to someone where they're in one of those states that they had forgotten when they weren't in that state. Amnesias. So retrograde amnesia, this is having lost memory of the past, but remembering whatever the traumatic event was. You're able to make new memories, but you can't remember the old memories. If the traumatic event happens and you are not able to make new memories, but you can remember everything in the past, that would be anterograde amnesia. This one, recall versus recognition, can be kind of tricky for students sometimes. Recall would be when you're actually forced to remember something and you don't have some kind of cue. Recognition is where you have this cue and you recognize the information. So here you probably recognize these as the 7 dwarfs because they're there and you're like, oh yeah, those are the 7 dwarfs. But there isn't necessarily maybe a cue to help you remember their names, and so you might have to go back and think back through what are all their names. Recall, a test with recall would be having like fill in the blanks and you don't have a word bank. You are forced to recall the information. Recognition would be a word bank. You can recognize that the words are there and you'll know what the definitions are. Elizabeth Loftus is a really important person for memory. She studies the misinformation effect and false memories when people remember things differently than they occurred. And so her very notable study was that when asked people who witnessed a car accident if they heard words like the cars smashed into each other versus when the cars hit each other, if someone asked them how fast were the cars when they hit each other, they remembered it less intense than the people who were asked when the cars smashed into each other described the event. People who heard smashed described glass on the ground, described the cars going faster, and remembered it slightly more intense than those that heard the phrase describe how the cars, or describe the scene when the cars hit each other. And so she studied that a little bit of information that is different can change the way someone remembers the event. As far as remembering the locations of where memory is, what's really important, explicit memories is in the hippocampus. The basal ganglia, that's where you're going to have those procedural memories. And then finally, last but not least, long-term potentiation. This is the biological explanation for memory. That the whenever you are going back and remembering and relearning, your brain remembers that and you will remember it more quickly.